Part 2, Developing Self-Awareness. Chapter 4, Signs of a Scout. Sweet. So already from the beginning of this chapter, she's pointing out something that could be well happening to me right now. A lot of people convince themselves that maybe they're already in scout mindset. And they think they're being reasonable. And that is a deterrent to actually to understanding the truth. Especially if you delude yourself into believing that you're motivated to learn the truth. Speaking of which, I was going over the book again, and I realized in my first introduction audio chapter, I mentioned that Scout Mindset was the seeing things for what they are, not what you want to believe them to be. I missed something, I'm pretty sure. There's the word motivation. Scout Mindset is the motivation to see things for what they are, not what they wish, not what someone would wish it to be. So there is a slight nuance to that. Since I actually made that audio chapter, I did look up some words and I found the word epistemology, which is basically the idea of, believing in something because of how justified it really is. And I was like, isn't that kind of like what Scout Mindset was? And it's because I missed that one word, which is motivation. So Scout Mindset is the motivation to actually believe in things as they are, not how you wish them to be. In the first section here, she mentions someone who thinks they're being reasonable, but everybody online tells them, no, you're actually not reasonable. So that's the first part of this chapter. I'm already liking it because it does bring up a good point. If you think you're already in Scout Mindset, then you probably are going to be deluding yourself, even if you read this book, right? So this is a great point to put out. Also, I think that this is also a very good example of how she's covering her bases. So I feel like she's really thought this out a lot, and that's really awesome. It's hard to poke holes in something when the person has already poked holes in their own argument. And I think that I can already tell that she's done her homework with that, and that's something that I totally respect. So, props to that. Ooh, so this gets pretty deep and pretty, pretty spicy very quickly, because next section kind of talks about Jeffrey Epstein and also Lawrence Cross, who kind of has a bias for Epstein. We all know the case. Well, maybe not everybody knows, but Jeffrey Epstein was, caught for being kind of like a sex trafficker for underage girls. I'm pretty sure. He ended up committing suicide in jail. And Lawrence Cross, he is very famous and very popular for, his beliefs of atheism, I believe. Is it atheism or agnostic? I believe it's basically, regardless, he doesn't believe in the Christian God. And I've watched a lot of videos about him, and it's very interesting, very fascinating fellow. And you do have to think kind of deeply about this, because deeply about kind of this idea if you think you're rational, because I'm sure that Lawrence thinks he's very rational or whatnot. Cross thinks he's brought up really good points and stuff like that. And what's interesting is that here he's defending Jeff Epstein, and he's saying, well, I'm a scientist and I base things on empirical evidence, and I've only seen him with women aged 19 to 23. So he's doing a few things. He's using his his title as scientist, or his job or an occupation as a scientist, to back him up. And he's also basing, it's not empirical evidence, it's more anecdotal evidence. According to him, he sees Jeff with women 19 to ages 19 to 23. That's anecdotal. That's not empirical. Sorry. Empirical, you have to be a little bit more. You got to give a little bit more than that. That's flawed. Flawed because it's anecdotal, and anecdotal, anybody can believe things because of their specific case and experience in their life story. And that's something to be very careful about. So it happened to you, so that means it must be true, right? So I never need to wear a seatbelt because I've never been in a car accident, or a seatbelt's never saved my life. So therefore, seatbelts are unnecessary. Is that empirical evidence? No, that's your case. That's anecdotal evidence, silly. So, anyways, so a part of me wants to say, "Oh, shots fired," like, ooh, you know. But getting back to topic here, we're going to discuss, or I'm going to get into this whole idea that she mentioned something that I see all the time, and I've never really been able to conceptualize it or to give it a name, but I know it's there. It's this idea that when people act like they're rational, they feel like they are rational, but no, that's not the case. I mean, you can have a certain tone with your voice. Like, I could sound like how I sound, but I could be saying the most stupid stuff out there. You know, I could be saying really, really crazy things, but I can say it in a poised voice, and I can be very, articulate about it. Or I could even be super bombastic and be like so emotional, blah, blah, blah. But I could be saying things that are actual fact. Just because you sound smart doesn't mean what you're saying is smart. And just because you sound like a surfer dude doesn't mean that you're going to say things that are just about surfing. Like, you could be extremely smart, extremely intelligent. And there is somebody I know, one of my old bosses, that sounds super, super friendly, super, casual, super, yeah, super casual. And, but personable. This is a great voice, super energetic, always being awesome. But he has one of the highest IQs of people that I've ever met. He's actually legally blind, and while he cannot see physically, he can see many things internally in his mind. And talking to him, his voice sounds like just, some cool dude. But honestly, the things that come out of his mouth are pure genius. So um, that's so I think a lot of people can fool themselves, and I see a lot of people who are like, look, I can explain this very calmly, very, very, very intelligently, and because I can say this, anything I say is correct. This is something that even I can probably fall into. I usually tend to talk in a way that, I don't know, is not cool. I don't know, or maybe it is. I have no idea. It depends. It depends on the situation, right? So, but anyways, so, uh, oh wow, no, this is a good point. But yes, it could. I can definitely see this as being, uh, something that will blindside people, and it's good to really make a point of it and really think about this. Just because somebody is yelling or they sound very, like, I don't know, out of control, does that mean that what they're saying is, uh, you know, it has no value or no credibility? Because I know a long time ago with me and my wife, when I wanted to get my point across, I would start raising the volume of my voice. And I thought that, okay, if I do this, then I can strike harder and I can be like, yeah, like, this is what I really want to tell you. And then she always said, whenever you do that, I tune you off because I think that everything you say is like, it's emotional, and because it's emotional, yeah, not logical. So I'm tuning you out. And to to a degree, I believe what she did was the right thing. She didn't reinforce the behavior, which ended up being really good. So now, whenever we argue or we debate, um, sometimes when I really want to make a point, I'll be very calm, and I'll kind of be like this, but then I'll be just slightly stern, and she'll know that I'm angry. But it's not because I'm raising my volume. It's the opposite effect. The more you yell loud, people want to tune you out, but the softer that you talk, the more people will try to lean in, and they want to hear what you're saying more, so they pay more attention to you. So volume dynamics is very interesting in that regard. So with that said, you know, the funny thing is that every time I did raise my voice, I always believed that I had a great point, or I found a weak point in her logic, but it never mattered to her because she already associated loud voice with irrational. For me, I associated loud voice with this is when I'm extremely rational and I've got you and I'm going to expose your weakness and haha, like I'm got you now, you know. And so it's interesting, the associations that people put on the tone of voice. That's why I you might realize that I mention actors a lot, and I think I explained this a few videos before, if not last video, but I'm around actors, and it's interesting because you don't have to be you don't have to be smart to sound smart. And a lot of people think that they're very smart because they can sound smart, but it doesn't mean they're smart. And it's almost like they convince themselves otherwise. So, okay, I'm not gonna beat a dead horse, but I just wanted to say this is something that I could definitely talk about, and it's very prevalent. And if anybody is listening to this, I would advise please be aware of this because this is something that is rampant. And it's something that can totally fool people. It can fool yourself very well too. Um, so just don't use that as a crutch to be like, oh, I sound smart, so I must be smart. Like, no, like, dismiss that. I totally believe that. Dismiss that notion right away. Um, what matters is so much more than that. So, there we go. I'm looking up a word right now. Tautology. Let me make sure I'm. Tautology, okay. The saying of the same thing twice in different words, generally considered to be a fault of style. E.g., they arrived one after the other in succession. Tautology, I see. Interesting. So, with this section, uh, more good points. Really respect what Julie is doing here. Being smart and knowledgeable doesn't make you a scout. My thoughts on that. Um, so this is great because I'm two things that people would think are rigid. One, I'm Catholic, and two, I'm conservative. And there's a study, or they say that people who are, these things, they're rigid because they're conservative. They're right, do you believe this? Well, if you do, then, you're rigid. You're not open-minded, And I would say that, and again, this can be false on my end, so I have to be careful. You know, I don't want to delude myself that I'm unbiased, because I'm pretty sure I am biased. But I want to be as open minded as possible, even if I know that being biased is kind of a part of human nature. And because I know that, I feel like it's important to be like, okay, well, this is just how it is, but let's try to break out of the matrix. Or let's break out of the matrix. Am I already out, or am I still in and I'm trying to break out? That's the question here. Um, so what's good is being able to challenge things, being able to talk about things. Does knowledge empirically mean that you're going to be smarter and that you're going to be unbiased? No. She makes a great point on that. Sometimes people think that the more they research, the more they have authority, the more they know what they're talking about. So it kind of further buttresses their beliefs, and they're like, oh, well, because I have done this for 10 years, or I've been, doing this for so long, like this must be the case. And again, that's not motivated for the truth. It's more motivated to prove your point. Uh, and sometimes a long time ago, I would get into debates with people, and the question that I would always want to answer would, or the question that I realized that I really had to answer instead of just debating with people is, do these people, are they even capable of changing their mind? Are they capable of changing their mind? If they're not, then it's a wasted effort. Although, or it could be just a very fun exercise and just see like how far can I actually go with this person? How far can, like I push their buttons? Like what ridiculous thing will they come up with if I poke holes in their argument? Or like it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. Or can they do that with me? You know, um, I married my wife not because she shared the same beliefs as me. We were completely different. Um, I was listening to audio that I did like back in 2016, and I was already mentioning back then that, yeah, I was conservative. It might be kind of uncomfortable to say this, but yes, I voted for Trump. Um, and in her family and her, for her beliefs are very opposite than mine. But that's what I love about her is that it's opposite. You know, I'm a Catholic. She's agnostic. So we talk about it a lot. It's and what's great about it is that as we have continued to develop together and talk about things together, we've both started to really change our beliefs in very nuanced ways. And Julia mentions this, and makes me, it reminds me of my best friend that's a writer. I have 5 best friends. I mentioned them in my other videos. You guys probably, if you've been following me or if you know about my other ones, you probably already know this, but I've got my best friend that's an entrepreneur. I have my best friend that's a writer. I have my best friend that is I want to call him my um, Japanese partner because he's not Japanese, or uh, he's like, we enjoy Japanese media together, I guess you can say. So, um, how, and then I have a best friend that's a philosophy best friend. So I've got these 4 best friends, and then my wife is like, again, she is my wife. She's like number one above all. Um, Speaking of which, I was listening to my previous audio videos earlier, and the very first one in December 2008, I was mentioning about like, so what do you do if you have like if you want your perfect mate, and you want like Jessica Alba? Well, you don't go for Jessica Alba. You can use Jessica Alba as kind of like a way to understand like what you want, but you know you don't want to be super specific, and and if you don't get this, that's it for you. You just use that as kind of like a springboard to understand like, okay, this is what I want. This is, and if I don't get it, that's okay. We can move on, you know. And then like 7 years later, or 7 8 years later, in my update in 2016, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in an amazing relationship with my girlfriend right now, and I talk about my friends. I talk about my entrepreneur friend a lot, my entrepreneur best friend, um, and maybe I should just call them that, like the entrepreneur or the philosopher or the Japanese. I don't know how to classify um, my other friend. Um, he's the hardest to classify because he's also like one of he's the most I would say that I meet with him the most frequently um, out of all of them. Um, but it's interesting. It's interesting. Anyways, so getting back to my friends here, my writer best friend, who is a writer, um, he mentioned to me that the truth is never one extreme or the other. It's always in the middle. And what's funny is that like that doesn't mean the dead center. It means it's just not. It's not just one way or the other. It's kind of nuanced, but it's somewhere in between. It's somewhere in between. Somewhere in the middle. Not. It's always in the middle. Well, it's always the middle versus it's always in the middle. And the middle is like, well, what does middle? What defines the middle? Well, everything in between. So Julie also mentions that it's never really the middle, and it's maybe I might even say maybe there are cases where it is a hard right or it is a hard left, and that's just the way it is. Um, for example, is the Earth round? Well, pretty sure that's a hard round. you know, it's a hard like globe. Uh, am I, for example, if I wanted to say, am I an ocean animal? No, that's a hard no. I can go to the ocean, but I'm not an ocean animal. So it's varied, but the truth is the truth. You know, and I feel like just like with the Jessica Alba analogy that I made, God, was that 12, 13 years ago? Um, it's kind of like how I see finding the truth or like finding your mate is like you can use the extremes to springboard you to understand what it is that you know get closer to the truth, to get closer to it, um, by comparing and contrasting. But it's always somewhere in the middle, somewhere usually, whether it be more right, more left, it's usually very nuanced though. The truth is extremely nuanced, I feel like, in most cases. Or you have to be very careful when you say this is the truth, because it can be the truth in one area, but it might not be the truth in another. So if I say I'm smart, okay, that can apply to certain things maybe. I read a lot. I've been reading a lot. So, but does that make me smart? Maybe it makes me smart in certain aspects. Knowing um, how certain systems work, yes. But does that mean I'm smart when it comes to ballet? No. So the truth is very nuanced, I feel, and that's something that we have to be aware of. If you cast out a blanket statement and say like, yeah, you're smart, or you're incompetent, it's like it's always true. You can be like, yeah, I'm smart at this, or you're incompetent. Yeah, I'm incompetent at Chinese because I know only maybe 3 words or 3 sentences. Um, so yeah, the truth is, I feel very nuanced, and that's why I believe books exist, and that's why I believe a book such as this exists because it's a very nuanced book, with very nuanced kind of concepts. And when you know more of the details of anything, I feel that's when things get very interesting in life because you're starting to realize like, oh, it's not just black and white. It's kind of like a shade that is like it's like the 27th shade uh, closest to white, or something like that. Um, it makes the world a lot more colorful and a lot more interesting. Um, hmm. Okay, so moving on. This is great. So the next section here, it mentions like kind of like if people actually are finding the truth or if they're just spouting nonsense and they think they are but they're really not, actually being a scout versus really being a scout. So so it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people, they think, you know um, she brings up a person who's like, oh, I know how to to like change people's minds. I just bring up the facts. And she's like, really? That works all the time for you? All the time. Right. So let's go ahead and check that out. So yeah, upon investigation, um, like no, that was never the case. And bringing up the facts. This is also a thing about intelligence. Just because you're intelligent doesn't mean that you're going to convince people to do things. I've looked up things. I know a lot of information. That has never been a key component of whether somebody can connect with me or if I can convince them to do something different. And I love talking about my wife, and the thing about it is that one way that I feel that is a clear sign of being of scout mindset mentality is the fact that if you're wrong, you're okay saying you're wrong. You're okay saying you're wrong, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's not right. let me hear what you have to say, and then you assess what the person says, and if it does make sense to you, even if this was a long held belief or anything, you're like, well, gosh, even though I did believe this, you do have a point. You have a point. Um, and then you kind of concede. You concede, and you're like, no, that's all right. Being able to be humble in your defeat and knowing when you're wrong, I think is something. And also, when new evidence is brought up to you, you're curious about it. You don't want to just defend your own statement, but you're curious of, is that really the case? Or wait, could I be flawed? And you're curious about your own logic, and you question your own logic, and you question um, things, and then you reinforce it. And again, this is what I think this book has a really good job doing, is like reinforcing this belief, because I'm pretty sure that this author has thought about these things. Um, so sometimes that's another thing, being interest being self introspective and literally trying to find holes in your argument, in your own argument. Anti fragility. The best kind of program that somebody makes is the programmer who creates the program and then tries to hack it. And once they hack it, they reinforce it, hack it again, reinforce it, hack it, hack it, hack it. Keep hacking until you know you can't hack it anymore. Like where's the loopholes now? Where's the holes? And maybe this is why I wanted to really really dive into this book and do a deep analysis, because I want to. I want to see, like, can I poke holes into it? And I can respect when someone does a good job of covering their bases, and being like, oh, well, there's this and there's this. The more I continue reading this book, the more I'm like, this might be kind of difficult to crack, and I'm still gonna give it a crack anyway. I'm still gonna see what I can do, obviously. Um, and I again, like, I went into this knowing, like, okay, if I'm here learning from somebody like Julia, like how to make better judgment, then she's probably, she knows all these theories, she knows everything. If I'm trying to learn from her, there's things that she knows that I don't know, and obviously I'm gonna discover these things as I continue reading it, and as I continue kind of like thinking and deliberating about things that I've read, and so on and so forth. Um, and maybe this audio is really more for myself than anybody else. In the end, I'll admit that. Maybe it is because I'm also processing this information, and I'm really trying to be like, okay, well, how does this fit in my life? Somebody who's listening might be like, gosh, this is boring. Why is this guy, talking about all these random things or whatever? And I'm being unapologetic about that, because like, I'm sure that some people might find it interesting, other people won't. That's just the way of life. Whenever you put something out there, people are gonna hate it or love it. So as long as I'm putting something out there and it can be critiqued and judged or whatever, so be it. That'd be great. That's fine. What are we here for? What am I here for? I'm here to explore life, explore philosophical ideas, see what I can take from it, how I can use it, how I can further it so that I can be more successful. What is the definition of success to me? Success to me is literally, could I say, just wealth, health, and happiness. I mean, I've got those three things already. Um, but I think success is fulfillment. Fulfillment is probably the best kind of indicator of like how successful somebody feels. If they feel fulfillment, then they're successful. That's what I believe success is. It doesn't have to be happiness. It doesn't have to be excitement. It doesn't have to be money. All of these things contribute to what I believe people are, used in order to have a fulfilling life. Even, religion, Christianity. A lot of people, you know, they all they need is, their religion, and that's what they need to be fulfilled. And there is a verse, where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well and says, once you drink this water, you'll never feel thirsty again. And religion being spiritual, it is very fulfilling, actually. Um, so to each their own. Everybody has their own parameters. Everybody has their own expectations. Everybody has their own definitions of what success is and what it means to be successful. For me, I believe it's fulfillment. And you can base that on, at the end of the day, you can measure that, daily by being like, is today a fulfilling day for me? You know, and if it is a fulfilling day and you feel like you really made the most out of your time, whether you have or not, if you feel it, sometimes it's just like, if you feel it, that's the thing about success, is that it's all about how, it's not an objective thing. People can say it's all about money, it's all about love, it's all about how healthy you are, like, all of that is thrown out the window when you realize that, everyone has their own parameters for success, you know, and there are people that want certain things and they never get them. There are people who know they're never going to get things and they're miserable about it, and there are other people who know they'll never get things but they work with it anyway, and they're like, well, I know that this isn't going to happen, but what can I get? Like, actually, I'm alive, so doesn't that count for something? And it's about framework, it's about mindset, it's all about all these things. So this book really opens my mind. Like, I'll read something and I'll be like, wow, that makes me think. And here I'm going on an intellectual journey as I try to see how valid the statements of this book are. And so far, really good, really, really exciting. But I'm just waiting to see if there's something that I can poke at. That's the challenge. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. So for point one, and this is something that I mentioned earlier, is like, do you admit when you're wrong? And do you admit when people have superior, judgment than yours? I love it when people have superior judgment over me, because, that not only tells me, like, oh, I can go higher, but it's always fascinating to me, and it's always, it's something I respect. It's like, oh, wow, like, this is something that I aspire to have, like, superior judgment, or to be wise, to make the right judgment calls. And I really think that is, that is a surefire way of knowing that you have that kind of attitude. Can you admit you're wrong? So that's perfect. So how do you react to personal criticism? So this one's interesting because, like I said in my last video, I assume it's a gentleman because of their name, but, like, I'll be honest, like, when I got the criticism, I was like, ugh, like, this is like negative energy. Like, I really don't like it. It's very uncomfortable. But, in the end, it's like, okay, well, hey, they might have a point. Like, when I talk, maybe it could be more animated. Maybe I ramble a bit. Maybe what I'm doing is not for him, but at the same time, maybe I am being disrespectful when I kind of go off and talk about myself a little too much, right? And sometimes I do that. Sometimes I do that. And I feel like sometimes that is how I am able to color, the book, I guess, or color, who am I to say I'm coloring the book? But color, like, the ideas that I get from the book is like, okay, so, like, how does this relate to me? And again, it's hard sometimes to get critiqued. Sometimes it's hard to really get critiqued because of the fact that we all have our own pride. I think we have our own pride, and we all think we're good. We all think we're good in our own respect. Not everybody. I can think of a few people who aren't like that. But it's interesting, and criticism is definitely something that happens when you put yourself out there. And in a weird way, I'm also kind of creating a critique about this book, right, when I'm putting it out there. Julia mentions here that she doesn't, well, she has to seek out criticism, but she's not actively, it's not like she wants it, or she's like, here you go, like, give me all the criticism you can give me, So that gave me a thought, like, so if Julia, if you are for some reason listening to this or whatever, like, yeah, I'm doing this let me know if it comes off as bad. But I think in the end, maybe I'm having a big head now thinking this, but in the end, I feel like when you put something out, especially when you publish things, you're probably also looking for criticism as well. And maybe this is something that maybe would, I don't know, um, regardless if I agree or disagree, in the end it will help. So it might be useful anyway. Um, it's not my intention to hurt or whatever. My intention is to analyze and to see what I get out of what I consume. So yeah. So hopefully this is okay. But yeah, if anything happens, I guess I'll adapt as if things happen, yes or no. So let's move forward. The next section is a great one. Do you ever prove yourself wrong? Proving yourself wrong. And for that, I think it's important to, when you make a statement, you look back on what you said and you go like, actually, I was wrong about that. This is what it really meant. In a weird way, I think I kind of did that earlier in this audio video, where I was like, I made a mistake. I said scout mindset um, is believing what is the truth, not what it is that we want. And then I apologized and said like, actually, no, there's motivated to be motivated to do that. So there's a nuance to that. Um, so that is some proof, I guess. But yeah, do I prove myself wrong? Yeah, if I find that there's an error in what I've said or what I've done, I do want to correct it. If there's anything that I'm doing that is hurtful, and sometimes I found this out from my wife a while ago. There would be many things that I would do because I'm kind of brash. I like to just do things. Um, I would be hurting other people's feelings unknowingly, or I would be hurting her feelings unknowingly, and I would think this is something that is just normal, natural for me. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. But in the end, it actually was very hurtful and whatnot. So then it comes to the point where you're like, okay, this was hurtful. I'm going to stop, or I'm going to amend what I'm doing, and I'm gonna, if I do want to get a point across, or if I want to achieve something, I'll be mindful of how people will look at this and what they will, uh, and just to better foster, you know, relationships with people. And I do tend to be like, okay, like I might have been this way, I might have been wrong. I used to bully my younger brother when I was younger. Um, like I used to just do all these things, and I remember there came a point where I think I might have watched a television show or something, and I realized what I was doing was wrong, and I think I I try to overcompensate so much. I was like, hey, I'm so sorry I used to do this. I realized I was such a bad brother. I was such a bully to you, and I would go out of my way to give favors and stuff like that. Um, and sometimes, as my wife tells me, sometimes overcompensating doesn't fix the deed, right? So just being aware, you know, that you know, uh, you're doing something wrong. The ability to actually rectify what you've done that's wrong, I think that is a challenge. Um, Again, usually because of pride, usually because we want to believe that we're right, and in the end, I think that it's important to be like, okay, no, I messed up, or I said something wrong here. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, and that's how we develop. I think that's a sure sign of development. You can never develop if you're rigid, right? Um, and the more you want to develop, the more you have to kind of like be willing to challenge yourself. You have to challenge your beliefs, even the whole belief of wealth, health, and happiness. Is that really what makes success, right? And maybe there are those three parameters or those three markers, right? Health, wealth, and success, but how much does that matter to you individually? Like, do you, or what are you missing? Are you fulfilled? What is fulfillment to you? Are you okay living in a normal house? You know, do you need to have 5 children? Do you need to have like no children? Do you need to have a partner? Do you not need to have a partner? You know, do you the success is such a, it's touted or touted whatever as like it's one way, but it's not one way. It is very particular to each individual, and when you understand what is your definition, then you can actually pursue it. Anyways, though, and then you have to correct yourself because we change as people. So 5 years ago, my definition of success is different than what it is now. Um, do I? Is it necessary to work out 3 hours every day? Is that what the definition of success is? Is it being the same weight as Floyd Mayweather? Like back then, like yeah, that was it. Like um, doing all of that, uh, having the perfect schedule, doing all these things, and I did all those things. I created a schedule that I believed was like this is the most fulfilling. I work on my studies with Japanese. I work on my body. I work on my relationships. I work on my finances. I work on, you know, um, knowledge, gaining knowledge. Just reading books, being with my friends. Surrounding myself with my best friends and fostering relationships. What's funny is that um, you get to this point where you're happy, and then you're like, well, gosh, that I I've hit it. You actually hit it, but then that changes because you're like, well, I don't need this anymore to be happy. I don't need to prove to myself that I can do these Herculean tasks every day. Maybe I just want to spend more time with my mate, or maybe I want to just. So I feel like you have to constantly be, um, you have to constantly reevaluate. You have to constantly develop because even when you think you've got it all, and you've fulfilled all your parameters, I guess you could say, um, then you have to go at it again because you're still alive, you're still living, and if you already have it all, then what's the purpose? It's like beating a video game, beating an RPG. For me, it's like a Japanese RPG. You beat an RPG like Final Fantasy VII. You've maxed out all your stats. You have all of the items, all the best things you could ever get in the game. Feel strangely empty, even though you thought what you were going for was going to make you fulfilled. You got every single thing you could possibly get, yet you feel empty once you hit that. And then, in order to feel fulfilled, you have to empty it again. So it's very interesting. Some people think that when you get married, that's the end all be all. It's not. Like you'll be happy that you got married and everything happens, but then you still got to work on your relationship. Like it doesn't end just because you married the person. Like it's a journey that you take together of discovery and everything. Um, so it's all you know really interesting. Anyhow, um, I feel like it's important that we continuously find ways to grow, even when our needs are met and we're satisfied with life. We're very satisfied. Sometimes feeling satisfied leads to a sense of being unsatisfied. So it's interesting because you have to me, I think satisfaction for me is growth, knowing that there's more that I can do, more that I can discover, more that I can make of myself. And mm, in the end of the day, in the end of life itself, what we end up, taking from it, I think that's what's most important. So let's keep going. The next section is about, do you take precautions to avoid fooling yourself? And this is interesting. I feel like because now this is more of like being like an interview on me because I so this is an interesting kind of dynamic. So, do I take precautions on fooling myself? I feel like I try to second guess myself when necessary, especially when I feel like I'm so self assured. So, earlier in a previous section, there was a. Let me see if I can find it. There was kind of like a little quiz of logic, and it's written here. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? And I was like, 1 minute, right? It's just that would make sense. It'd just be one. But then I was like, wait, wouldn't it take 5 minutes? Because if it takes 5 minutes, like the question would be like, if it takes 5 minutes, wouldn't 5 minutes be like how long it takes to complete the widget? So in 5 minutes, it takes 5 machines to make 5 widgets. Then for 100 widgets, shouldn't it just take 5 minutes? And then again, the question it's nuanced. I realized because I was like, wait a second. So you can take it two ways. If each machine it took 1 minute for each machine to make the 5 minutes, then yeah, it's like okay, 5 minutes, 5 machines, 5 widgets. You know, um, is that the production time that it takes, or did each? Because if you imagine that they're all doing it at the same time, they all start at the same time, they all end at the same time. In the end, they in 5 minutes they create 5 widgets. Then wouldn't it mean to say that if you have 100 widgets, it would take 5 minutes because in the end, that's the production time. It just takes 5 minutes, and you have 100, so it'll make 100. So it's just 5 minutes. It should always be 5 minutes. And I think that's the right answer if I think about it. Because initially you would think, oh, it'd be one. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. But no, it's actually 5 minutes to one ratio, right? So that's kind of how I think about things. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's more nuanced than that. Like, in the beginning, I'll be like, oh, yeah, it's just one. It's just one. It just takes 1 minute. But no, it actually if that's the production time, it takes 5 minutes, then it takes 5 minutes. And if 100 are working on it, it'll still take 5 minutes. You know, so it's that's how I kind of like check myself. Is like I'll put out an answer, and sometimes it's the go-to answer. It's the answer where it's like, oh yeah, that's obviously it. But then yeah, I kind of second guess myself and be like, wait a second, hold up a second. Um, Being aware of nuance, I think, really helps with that. Um, but it is a trap when you think you're so confident, you never look back, and that's the thing. Is like, can you look back? Can you be like, wait a second, I might have erred here, So that's the idea here. So do you ever prove yourself wrong? Yes, and then do you take precautions to avoid fooling yourself? Yeah, it's kind of like you realize you're not perfect and you realize that you have biases, like what I mentioned earlier. And it's like, well, I'm aware I have it. It's not. I don't think I can eliminate bias, but at least if I'm aware that I have bias, then or biases, see, autocorrection, then it's like okay, you know, I can. And I think it's also like, see, when I was 13, I had a really one of my closest friends, um, all we would do was debate over and over and over and over again. That's all we did when we hung out was debate. We would debate on being liberal versus being conservative. We would debate on, you know, whether Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series, was superior to the Rainbow Six series. Um, I think it all started kind of at around that time when I was 12, 13, when I met this friend. He passed away, unfortunately, 2009, rip, you know, um, literally, but it's like that's what kind of started all this. And when you debate with somebody, you realize like, oh my gosh, like this person, right? um, they'll get me if I leave any openings. So I better be careful. So that might have been the genesis or the origin of like why I think the way that I do. Um, it never stopped, you know. Uh, when I went to college, I remember that my philosophy professor uh, mentioned that when this was in Socrates' book, I believe. Sorry, Socrates never wrote a book. Plato wrote a book, but it was Plato's book about Socrates, and they're mentioning that young people shouldn't practice philosophy. They shouldn't debate because they're too young. You have to be at least 60 years old before it really becomes valid, or it like when you're young, it's just sport. You're just doing it for sport. You want to just see if you're better than the other person. But when you're older, you have to wait until you're 60 years old before it's like you actually are doing it for a true understanding. And that never really sat well with me because I was like, I realized though, I did realize, I'm like, oh my gosh, all throughout middle school and high school, yeah, it was for sport. It was for like, is my logic better than yours kind of thing. It was really, really, yeah, it was just like we would be on the swim team and we'd be like competing with other schools, and while we're like on the bus going to the other high school, or we're in the bleachers waiting for our turn to race against other swimmers, um, we'd still be debating over like the craziest things, like is God a woman, or just stuff like that. um, Something that I was really passionate about. uh, so anyways though, that was really mm, that that's what I think is it's important when you're, especially if you're doing it as a sport. You're like, wow. um, but yeah, no, like I kind of wanted to be like, I wanted to tell my professor like, no, like okay, I might be like I was 18 at the time. 17. Yeah, I was 17 at the time because I went to college a little bit earlier. So I was 17 and I heard this. It was summer course before the actual year started, but I started it a bit earlier. Um, I took philosophy, and I was like, okay, I know I'm only 17, and Socrates is saying you have to be 60, but I don't have to wait until 60. I can debate while learning um, things without trying to make it a sport, and trying to actually understand things. And that book actually really, or that reference and that professor really shaped the way that I think about how you should go about understanding knowledge. Is like, don't wait until you're old before you're like, oh, I'm mature now. Now I can admit when I'm wrong. Now I can admit, like, no, like you can do it at any time. And while it can still be used as a sport, like I still love competing, you know in logical discussions and stuff like that. um, I don't think that you have to wait until you're so old before um, you're able to gain that type of maturity. So anyways though, uh, moving forward, this is really nice. So I ended this chapter, and it's great. Do you have any good critics? I'm just like, oh, interesting. So, it makes me think. Now I'm being meta again. I'm like, oh, interesting. So, am I being a good critic? So, I hope I am in a weird way. Even though my intent for this is to have a deep analysis, I hope that, my critiques, are good. But I'll just, I'll go you know, as I continue on and see how this goes. Again, there's a lot of things I know I'm already predispositioned to believe most of these things, because I actually do like, I do think scout mindset is great. But sometimes when you read from another author or another person, you it's easier to see where your own flaws are. And in a weird way, going through this is me also challenging myself, if that makes any sense. Um, Maybe I'm giving myself too much of an easy time in that case. But it's interesting. But there are a lot of good things. And then again, it just could be a solid argument at the same time. So, anyways, what I like about this last section about good critics is that I feel like, let's see, Yeah, so it's talking about Darwin, and it's talking about, how he knew him him kind of putting out his book was like it's going to be a big thing. And I was thinking about when I learned about Darwinism in school, and obviously I grew up Catholic. I still call myself Catholic, although my religious views are probably very nuanced. Um, so, but anyways, though, um, I remember when I learned about Darwinism, and my teacher was mentioning, like, now for all of us who are religious, I just want to say this might, uh, put some controversy out there, um, but this is something that we're going to be teaching. And I remember in my head, I was like, "Wait, what's going on?" Like I'm learning this new thing. Oh, evolution. Wait, why is that controversial? What is controversy? I think I was only like in sixth or seventh grade, so I was kind of like, "Wait, what's going on?" But it's funny because Darwin, I'm sure this is relatively recently, 1859. That's not that long ago. But when I was gosh, it must have been 1997 or 1998. I was learning about, you know, uh, evolution, and even then, like almost 150, yeah, about 140 years later, um, yeah, it was still controversial. There's still like criticism. There's still people, even up until now that are so about it. Um, and I find that interesting because it is somewhat recent, not super recent, but it's quite recent if you think about it. Um, and it derails the human centric kind of like pride. We're like, oh yeah, we're uh, the top of the animal kingdom. It's so interesting. But what I like, and I think the reason why Darwin's theory even was able to propagate and gain so much traction is because of the fact that he was humble and he was like, well, I am open to debate. I am open to talk about this. Oh, I see you've wrote a very passionate letter about, what I've written, and we actually agree on a lot of the same things. But I only favor this more rather than you, but I see we're kind of on the same page. So that was actually, I think because he was like that and he wasn't so bullheaded and saying like, no, I'm right, and I spent all my life doing this, and now you guys have to believe it because I believe it. It's like no, it's like, oh no, I see what your argument is, and I agree. There are some good things, and it's about doing that. Like throughout this audio series, I'm sure there are probably some points that I raised that will be answered later in the book, or there might be things that will end up kind of being moot. But at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, well, is this something? There might be a collection. There might be a few things that are just really worth like investigating or thinking about. And I'll admit some of the ideas that I throw out there might not even like be that significant at all. But if there's just a handful, or even if there's just one that I can that I can find, it's kind of like finding gold through all this dirt, right? It's not an easy process, and there's a lot of filtering that has to be done in order to find that gold. You have to really sift a lot through a lot of dirt before you find it, and you're like, aha, this is really interesting. This is really great. Um, that's in terms of my criticism in general, like, or whatever. If I was to take it from that point of view, like how worthy is or how valuable is my own criticism. But also on the flip side, I feel like me as a reader, finding information from this book, I also have to sift through it. Okay, so there's like a lot of information. There are a few things that are really good that I'm like, whoa, like this is great. Like I haven't thought about this before. There are other things that I probably already know. There are probably things that I already can support with my own life experience. I'm like, yep, okay, yeah, I got it, right. But there are certain things that really pop, like the whole idea of like sounding intelligent doesn't mean you're intelligent, and that does sound like a very kind of just little thing, but when you've experienced it and when you've lived it, and you're like, oh yeah, no, people really think they're smart just because they sound smart, or people think people are stupid just because they sound stupid, but they're not. That's a big thing. That's a big thing to me. Do you have any good critics? I feel like the quality of critics also comes forth from the quality of what you put out. So if you have something of a certain caliber or quality, that will affect the criticism or yeah, of what comes from it. So it's very interesting. Really curious about how things go. This was a really good chapter, and next time is going to be chapter 5, noticing bias. So it's going to be about understanding tools and stuff so that you can recognize if you're biased or not. So this is great. So, anyways, with that said, have a good day, and until next time.